Good evening, everyone. We're just gonna wait a few more moments and allow everyone to be able to get signed in and settled. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Cybersecurity and Fraud Prevention for Dentists, presented by Eide Bailey. My name is Amanda O'Brien. I will be your webinar specialist this evening. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Everyone's video has been turned off and you are muted. However, if you have any troubleshooting issues, please utilize the chat function and we will address them as soon as we can. Also, if you have any questions during this evening's presentation for either Art, Anders, or Brandon, please utilize the Q&A function and we will pause at certain points of this evening's presentation to address your questions. And with that being said, we will go ahead and turn our time over to our presenters.
Thank you very much, Amanda. As always, you do a great job in helping coordinate these webinars, and welcome everyone. My name is Art Wiederman and welcome to, I believe this is our fourth of 12 Business of Dentistry series being presented in tandem by Eide Bailey. I am a dental division director for the CPA firm of Eide Bailey. We work with about 800 dentists, and mostly in the Western United States. 300 of them are in our office in Tustin. And tonight we have a very, very special presentation. We have two very, very smart individuals. And before I get started, I will let you know that I had a procedure done on my nose, which is why I have a big bandage. And the other guy looks a lot worse than I did, but I'm okay, just in case anybody was worried. I will not be doing much talking tonight. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity in the dental office, and we're going to be talking about fraud prevention and embezzlement prevention in the dental office. We have Anders and Brandon, who are experts in these fields, and we're going to talk about those. I want to do a couple things. First, I want to thank the 6 local dental societies who have sponsored this and have been on this journey with me that we started last November, and that would be Leah Deshian from the San Gabriel Valley Dental Society, Greg Orloff from the Los Angeles Dental Society, Kurt Thornton from the San Fernando Valley Dental Society, Megan Francis from the Orange County Dental Society, Michelle Schneider from the West Los Angeles or Western Dental Society, and Kristen Navina from the Harbor Dental Society. These executive directors work very, very hard for all of you to bring you great programs, which I hope you'll see will be a great program tonight. A couple of, again, housekeeping things. If you have questions, put them into the Q&A and we'll get to them for both Anders and Brandon. Next Wednesday night, April 21st, we are going to do the 4th of our transition series on, we had Pat Wood on legal aspects. I talked about the brokerage aspects and the financial aspects of selling and buying a dental practice. Kathleen Johnson in March talked about the management aspects, and now we're going to bring it full circle, and we're going to have a representative from Bank of America, Justin Klingshirn, talk about credit and what you need if you want to buy and what you should be looking at if you're a seller. So that's 6 to 8 p.m. on the 21st. And then for our new dentist series, which is going to be Tuesday the 27th, we're going to be talking about some new dentist issues, HR issues, maybe some overhead issues. So be sure to join us then. Again, our next monthly one after this is going to be the 2nd Wednesday of May. And that is going to be really great. We're going to have the people from Dental Intel talking about metrics, along with myself and Dr. Jeanette Kern. Okay, Amanda, if you could advance the slide here. And I'm going to just give one quick update. Next one, thank you. So for those of you who have not heard me talking about this, we did this webinar in March. If your dental practice was closed down like everybody else's for 8 to 12 weeks in the second quarter, usually it's been March 16th to around the middle of May, end of May. If you had a greater than 50% reduction in your gross revenues for the second quarter of 2019 versus second quarter 2020, you could qualify for tens of thousands of dollars in the employee retention tax credit. If you're interested in that, if you have a reduction and you have not filed for SBA forgiveness, we're suggesting that you wait and do this analysis. We've done this analysis now for, oh my gosh, 30, 40 dentists, and we're just getting started. And we are seeing the average refunds that we're able to get doctors in this credit. They are in the tens of thousands. I did one the other day that was $155,000. I have one coming up that's over 200,000. So this is real money if you meet these criteria. Even if you have filed for SBA forgiveness, there's still a good opportunity. We have to get this done for everybody in July or August because that's when your 10-month period is up. All I can tell you is we do this, we have over 20 people in our group, headed up by our partner, Jim Donovan, who was on the webinar last time. And he is the one that's kind of heading this up along with myself. And if you need some help, give me a call, send me an email at awiederman@eidebailey.com. Okay, let's go ahead and I'd like to now introduce our first speaker. We're going to start off talking about cybersecurity. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then I'm going to kind of open the topic with a slide I want to show you. So Anders Eriksson is a risk advisory principal here at Eide Bailey out of Boise, Idaho. And Anders leads the Eide Bailey Cybersecurity Services team. He helps clients understand their cybersecurity risks and creating a plan for remediation and remediating weaknesses and managing ongoing risks. Part of what his job is, he plans and executes assessments of IT security practices, risks and controls against organizational, industry, and government standards. So I want to share this. I think this is a great entree into this topic. Many of you might have seen 60 Minutes, one of my favorite TV shows. And on 60 Minutes last Sunday night, they had an interview with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. For those of you who don't know, the Federal Reserve controls the money supply and has a lot of say in inflation and interest rates in this country. And he basically was saying that the country is coming back from this pandemic. We're seeing a lot of additional jobs being added. We're getting stronger. Things are getting better. They're hoping unemployment, which is now in the neighborhood of, they say, 6%, is going to come down. However, Scott Pelling, who was the interviewer, basically said, so Mr. Powell, is there anything that can derail this recovery? And if you look on the right side of this slide, I will read this to you, what he said. The world evolves and the risks change as well. And I would say that the risk that we keep our eyes on the most now is cyber risk, Powell said Sunday. There are scenarios in which a large financial institution would lose the ability to track the payments that it's making, where you would have a part of the financial system come to a halt. And so we spend so much time, energy, and money guarding against these things. Folks, the cyber thieves and crooks out there are very, very smart. Anders is smarter than all of them. He has promised me that he is smarter than all of them. Brandon's given me a thumbs up. So we're going to talk tonight, folks, about how you can protect your dental office. Because remember, if you have a hack, a couple of things happen. Number one, they could hold your ransom. Number two, you're out of business for a while, and that costs you money every single day. So without any further ado, Anders, please take the stage over. Let me introduce Anders Eriksson and take it away, Anders.
Awesome, thank you. Make sure I've got control of the screen here. Is that working? There we go. All right.
I won't hack your screen, I promise.
You're all good. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, this evening. Appreciate the chance to talk to you all about cybersecurity. It's definitely an important topic. And so tonight we're going to talk about the impacts of cybersecurity, some of the challenges that our society is facing, dental practices specifically are facing when it comes to security. We'll talk about some cybersecurity trends in the context of sort of perception and what people think risks are and what the reality is of those risks. And then we'll talk about some preventative stuff. What can you do? What are some things you can do to help your practices stay secure and not end up being a victim of a cyber attack? And we'll end with some key takeaways. So when we talk about the impacts of the challenges of cybersecurity, well, cybersecurity is the fastest growing crime in the US today, both in size, sophistication, cost. I'm not going to go through every one of these bullets, but I think there's a couple that are interesting. The average cost is about $380,000 per incident. So you think about that in your individual practices. What would the impact of that type of outlay of money be for your organization? 83% of data breaches against small business are financially motivated. And so they're really, the criminals are looking for money. It's become a real criminal network. You don't even have to be a technical genius or guru. You're really just a criminal, because when you find out, you go on the dark web, and cybersecurity, cybercrime is actually almost a service. You can get cybercrime as a service where you don't have to know anything about it. You can just go hire a hacker and they're going to go do all the dirty work for you. So there's definitely a growing trend in going after small business. And what we've seen is that, you look 10, 12 years ago, and a lot of the cyber attacks were happening at large organizations. So you had the Home Depots of the world and the Targets where these breaches are taking place. And as a result, those large organizations invested in cybersecurity, and oversight organizations and governing bodies came in and said, we need security for these large organizations. And so the opportunity for criminals and hackers became less at that large organization level. And so they started moving down market. We saw this continuing trend of criminals going after smaller and smaller organizations because they were going where the opportunity was, and there was less barriers to them getting a successful hack, less opportunities for or less investment in cybersecurity. And so people were just a little more wide open at small organizations. So there's continuing to be this downward trend in risks to smaller and smaller organizations. But the impacts of a cybersecurity breach on a business are huge. And here's just several. Here's just some that are important to focus on. Think about what this would do to your business. So you expose employee or personnel information, lost or inaccessible customer or company data. Your systems could be down or running slow, or leading to poor customer service, a strain on internal resources and management, potential loss of revenue, unplanned costs due to a compromise. And what's scary about a cyber breach is when we look at what the ones we've been involved in and we've tried to help organizations recover from a cyber breach, is that these impacts aren't just one. It's not like we had this breach and it really impacted, the impact was number two here. No, they're pervasive. They hit usually sometimes 3 or 4 of these impacts. So there's not something to be taken lightly. It's something that can be incredibly disruptive to a business. And so the key is to not get in that situation in the first place. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Cyber breaches are on the rise. 95% of cybersecurity breaches are due to human error. And it's important to recognize that cybersecurity, we talk about it in a lot of the context of IT and technology. But at the end of the day, it's a human problem. It is the way that we interact with technology that leaves us vulnerable to cyber attacks. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. But at the end of the day, think of cybersecurity as a human problem. Stop trying to sort of bucket it as this is my technology problem. A couple of headlines related to dental cybersecurity breaches. Now, dental breaches are, they're not high. You don't see a lot of them in the news, but if you do a little research, you can find they're happening. And they're happening particularly because they're at least known because a lot of times HIPAA data is involved. And when HIPAA data is involved, there's a required disclosure of that breach. And so you can go out to the HHS website and you can basically download a listing of all cyber breaches or data breaches that involved HIPAA. And there's going to naturally be some dental practices in there. Examples are receptionists in New York getting sentenced to jail for disclosing HIPAA data, dentists paying out fines of $12,000 after 60 boxes of patient files were dumped. Ohio-based dental insurance carrier suffered a data breach through a compromised employee email account. And that's an important one right there. We see that happening more and more, where the cyber criminals are actually getting control of an email system, and that email system is allowing them to then really monitor the information that's coming in and out, and any data that's going through that, then they could potentially take or steal. The last one here is the HIPAA security breach at a Florida dental practice impacts 4,000 patients. In kind of preparation for this, I thought, 4,000 might be a lot of patients. Maybe you're thinking, I don't have that many patients. That's maybe a large practice, but it's important to recognize that these costs add up quickly. And in preparation for this, I went out to there's a website called eRisk Hub. And eRisk Hub is an organization that basically provides cyber breach resources to companies that have been breached. And so if I've been breached, I can go there and they'll say, here's a breach coach you can talk with, or here is an insurance company you should be working with. So they're basically a hub for a lot of different cyber services, but they have a breach calculator. And so I plugged in a couple different points of data, including, let's say you had 2,000 records, and those records had PHI or HIPAA data in them. If it was your first breach, data was stored centrally. There's no fraud expected. There's no class action lawsuit. If you don't have cybersecurity breach coverage, the cost of that alone, look at them, we're talking 2,000 records, is $810,000 is what they're estimating. Now that might be a little bit high, but it's a lot of money. So think about the impact that would have on your organizations if you had to make that kind of outlay from a breach. So let's get back into here. So what are some of the causes of these violations? I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I want to talk about a couple of them. That second one down is one I touched on previously, where you're sending, or you're not securing sensitive information that's being sent via email. I think there's this misunderstanding about what email is and isn't. And then I think a lot of people feel like, well, I'm sending an email from myself to this individual, and that is as a private communication, when in fact it's not. Email by itself is not a secure form of communication. It's actually, once it leaves your office, it is out on the internet, and then anybody who is tapping into that wire or looking at those packets that were coming across could pull that data and recreate it. So you have to be very careful with the information that you're sending via email. And we've seen some organizations get burned pretty heavily by the types of information that they're sending. And that specifically happens in HIPAA, and you don't realize it. You've got some healthcare data or some patient information, and you're emailing that. You don't realize that they're in just doing that itself, you're creating a potential exposure. Going down further to the bottom, lost or stolen device with patient data. We need to be really careful about where we are putting our patient data. We sometimes feel like, well, if it's on the computer, it's safe, or I've got this computer in my office and it's safe. But think, I can't tell you how many times we see laptops being stolen, or somebody putting information on a USB drive and that being stolen, and that all constitutes a data breach that is reportable and finable. So just be careful of where your data is and how you're protecting it. And recognize that you've got a responsibility to protect this data and make sure that it's being used securely and safely. 54% of companies have experienced one or more cyber attacks in the last 12 months. So this is an interesting concept, this idea of one or more cyber attacks. And the way I kind of equate this is, if you're a fisher, like to go fishing, if you find a good fishing hole, you go back to that same one because you know you can catch them there. And cyber criminals are the same way. They find somebody who falls for ransomware and has to pay that ransom. More than likely, they're going to come back in the next 12 months and try to do it again, because they know that they're going to get a payout from that, or more likely to get a payout. So what's sad is that we see organizations, and I could name for you 5, 6 right now, organizations that had a breach. We came in and give them recommendations for how they could improve their security, and they chose not to implement those changes, and then were breached within 12 months. It is not an uncommon thing. So take it seriously. If you do experience a cyber attack, get the help you need so it doesn't happen again, because they'll come after you again. Here's a couple risky behaviors, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can do to mitigate some of these. But here's some things people aren't doing, particularly within dental practices. Not backing up files, not having good backups of your data, not encrypting data, both when it's being sent, so data in transit, but also data at rest when it's sitting on your computer. Is it being encrypted? Emailing without encrypting, which we talked about before. Having an open Wi-Fi network. We just sort of set up a Wi-Fi, and people come in, and our patients are waiting in the waiting room, and we say, well, there's a Wi-Fi you can connect to. But if it's open and it's also the same Wi-Fi that your computers connect to, there's a risk there that they're going to be able to potentially get onto your network. And last, team members not trained in HIPAA and security. And we'll talk a little about why training is so important. Again, it goes back to the idea that security is a human issue. It's not necessarily a technology issue. 6 months is the time it takes most companies to detect a security or data breach, even major ones. And this kind of goes into the mindset of what a cyber criminal is thinking, because they're not bound by time and money. They're there playing the long game. And so they're going to get onto your network, and they're going to be as quiet as possible, and they'll wait. And they'll wait until the opportunity arises, and they'll gather little pieces of information here and there. They'll slowly try and get more and more privileges on the network, on the computers, to the point where they've got some information that they feel like they could make money off of. And they begin to pull that off, and they'll do it ever so slowly so that you really isn't detected or noticed. And then by the time that we recognize that they're there, it's really too late. So just because you haven't had a security breach doesn't mean you're in the clear. You really could have some challenges and some risks currently on your computers and on your network. So let's talk about some cybersecurity trends, and what do we see in society and in general, organizations struggling with when it comes to cybersecurity. And to do this, we're going to focus on 10 major issues that were really established by the federal government. The Department of Homeland Security has an organization called CISA, or the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and they focus on, well, what are the significant problems with cybersecurity that are out there right now? And they came out with this list of 10 major issues. And we're going to look at this in the sort of the idea of, or through the lens of, what is perception versus reality? Because each of these issues, we are thinking one way when reality is different. So we'll walk through these, and then if you got any questions, feel free to throw the questions into the Q&A, and we'll address those in just a minute here. All right. So the first issue is this idea of the value of data. And there's this perception that, well, I don't have anything of value. Why would anybody want my data? I'm just a small little practice. Who would be interested in what I have what I have? And the reality is that all data is valuable. There is no data that's not. It's valuable to somebody. Sometimes it might only be value. The value is only that you have it and somebody else doesn't. Ransomware has opened up a whole new idea of what the value of data is. And if you're not familiar with ransomware, what it does is, ransomware is a type of malware or virus that when it gets on your computer, it does two things. The first thing is it encrypts everything it can find. It'll encrypt everything on that computer, and it'll encrypt everything on every computer that's connected to. So if you have a server with your patient data, it's going to get onto that and it'll encrypt it, and you won't be able to get to that. And the second thing it does is, after it's encrypted data, it drops a ransom note on your computer. And that ransom note basically says your computer's been encrypted, and the only way we're going to give you the keys to unencrypt it is if you pay us a ransom. So it becomes ransomware. But now all of a sudden that data, doesn't matter how valuable it is, you can't use the system. And so the value is in that you don't have it. And so the hackers create this value. So don't think for a minute that you don't have valuable data. It's incredibly valuable, and that we rely on that data and the systems to do our business. The second issue we're seeing is sort of this: who's responsible for security? And there's this perception that, well, security is an IT issue, and my IT person is going to take care of it, and I'm trusting them to do that. When the reality is that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, and every single user has they just take part of that. Every person in your office has a responsibility for cybersecurity. They can't push it off. They can't say, well, somebody else's, because anyone can be the weak link that clicks on a link that deploys malware and takes your system down. So everybody needs to recognize their responsibility and roles in helping your organization and your office to be secure. The next issue is cost. And there's this perception, people think that, well, cybersecurity, it costs a lot. I don't have the money to spend on it. Now, there's one argument to be made, is that, well, the costs of not spending money on cybersecurity are too great. Something too bad could have. But what the reality is, when it comes to the cost of cybersecurity, many of the basic cybersecurity stuff don't require a lot of financial investment. It's more cultural. It's more habits and how we interact with technology. And the simplest changes in how we perform tasks could have a big impact on the security. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those things are. But many of you already have the technologies you need. They just need to be used correctly, or set up correctly, or managed a little more securely and directly. Vendor management. There's this perception that our vendors are taking care of security. I got an IT guy, I outsource it, he's responsible for it. It's kind of like this picture here. We've got a forklift being used by a forklift to put this thing on the second story. We're using vendors, and we think that they're there. We're using vendors for security, but in reality, sometimes our IT vendors, they're really not built for security, or that security is an add-on service that we've got to specifically ask for. And so making sure that our vendors are doing the things they need to do is our legal and ethical responsibility. We still have to protect that data. And if there's a breach, I can't point to my IT guy and say, my first service provider, and say, hey, well, they didn't do it. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility. Now, they're not going to look good, but you're the ones whose name is going to be in the mail or in the news, and you're the one who's going to have to be reporting that data breach. Cyber insurance. A lot of organizations, a lot of people say, well, I got this general liability. I've got my liability insurance, and if I get hacked, that'll cover it. And we need to get rid of that sort of perception, because the insurance, this is a huge change in the market, in that cyber insurance we've seen a huge uptick in cyber insurance policies. You need to get cyber insurance specifically for cyber. And what's interesting is, in the last year and a half or so, what we've seen is a lot of organizations who even have cybersecurity insurance, breach insurance. They'll get hacked, but they didn't read the fine print in their insurance, and it didn't cover a particular type of attack. And so they're not able to take advantage of that insurance. So understanding what your cyber liability insurance coverage is and how it's and how you're being covered is important. And I'll refer you again to that company called eriskhub.com. That's all one word, eriskhub.com. It's a great resource for going and finding insurance brokers, finding individuals who can help you make sure you've got the right insurance. And if you have specific questions, we work with not only insurance brokers. I don't get a kickback from them. These are just brokers that we work with, and they give you a second quote. Or if you'd rather work with an attorney, we've got attorneys, in fact, some right there in California, who work with organizations and help make sure they've got the right cyber liability insurance coverage. It's becoming a huge issue for organizations to get the right insurance coverage. So make sure you're covered correctly. Yep, wrong button. Insider threats. I love this picture because you got these two pilots, and they're not even recognizing what's right in front of them. And the perception of it, a lot of times is, well, my greatest cyber threat is from China or Russia. So if I'm taking care of that threat, I'm covered. But the reality is that cybersecurity risks don't always come from external sources. Sometimes the greatest danger is right in front of us, either because they're malicious, but more often because it's just negligent. I don't perform the right or manage security the right way, or manage my activities in the system the right way, and I leave the organization open. What we see a lot of is individuals who have like administrative access on a system, who don't take care of their user account and password, don't protect the password, and that gets compromised. And now they become a threat because the hackers potentially get access to their account and then can go do malicious things on the network, and it looks like that individual's doing it. So it's not necessarily that that insider threat is somebody who's trying to be actually go out and actually do something wrong, but they're just being negligent, and it's causing the organization a threat or a security risk. All right, 3 more on these issues. The next one is assumed knowledge. People think, well, I got millennials, I've got Generation X. These people grew up with technology. They know how to work online safely. I don't need to educate them or tell them what security is. But the reality is there's no correlation between age and good security practices. Everybody needs to be educated on what it means to be secure and how to have good cybersecurity hygiene. Compliance versus security, and this is this is an important one because a lot of organizations within healthcare, within banking, within government, highly regulated organization environments, they think, well, I met the expectations for HIPAA or whatever security compliance mechanism is there, and they think that they're secure, but really the reality is that compliance does not equal security. And so you need to make sure that even though you maybe checked the boxes and met the minimum requirements for compliance, we'll make sure there's not additional risks out there. And in addition, just being secure doesn't mean you're compliant. So it kind of goes both ways. You need to think about compliance, and you also need to think about security. Physical security still is a challenge and an issue for organizations. A lot of organizations try to create a culture, offices try to create a culture where we're family and people can come in, and we try to be very open. But the physical risks are still there, and you can put great security and cybersecurity in place. But if somebody can walk up to one of your computers and plug in a USB while you're not looking, they could open you to some huge risks. So make sure that you've got good security hygiene when it comes to physical security, and who you're letting back into your office, who you're letting behind the desks to be able to actually touch the computers and see what's on the screens. And lastly, security and new technology. There's this perception that, I bought this from a manufacturer, they're not going to give me a piece of unsecure technology. But the reality is that almost all new security, whether it's hardware, software, it does not come secure out of the box. It needs to be tailored, it needs to be configured correctly. And it's important to have a security expert come in and help you set that up. Well, what we're seeing a lot of nowadays is organizations who've transitioned to Office 365, and some of your organizations might have done that also. But that transition to Office 365, where you all send your emails up in the cloud, it's a great cost savings. It's a great management tool or tool to be able to manage it more efficiently, the email and access to files. But these cloud services have to be configured correctly, and there's out of the box, they're not necessarily the default settings on these Microsoft tools are not secure. So having a professional come in and say, here's how you should be configuring that and taking full advantage of the security options that are there on those tools is important. I'm going to take a break there for a second. Art, if there are any questions out there? If there's not, we'll keep going, but I just want to take a step breath and see if anybody's got any questions. You there, Art? Let's see.
I don't have any questions, Anders. That either means that your information is brilliant and well composed and very understandable, which I would agree with, or their heads are all spinning.
All right, well, we'll just keep going then.
Okay.
Thanks, Art. So let's talk about what you can do. What are the preventative steps you can do to make sure your organization isn't going to be facing a security risk, a security challenge? And to do this, we're going to focus on fundamentals. It's kind of like basketball. I played basketball when I was young, and coach would spend all this time doing fundamentals. And you learn that the fundamentals are what's going to help you build on it and actually be a successful basketball player and a successful basketball team. And cybersecurity is no different. There's lots of cool gadgets and bells and whistles, but at the end of the day, there's some foundational or some fundamental activities that you can be doing. And so in working with our incident response team and other security professionals, we came up with what we identify as our 7 fundamental cybersecurity activities. These are 7 things that all those people that we work with, they got breached, all those companies, if they had put these 7 things in place, they would not have gotten breached, or the risk would have been reduced significantly that they would have gotten breached. And so these are not heavy lifts for smaller organizations. They apply to small organizations just as much as they apply to the Walmarts of the world. But you as an organization should be looking at these 7 things and what you can do or how you can implement these and how they can effectively reduce your risk. So let's delve into these 7 things. I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit of detail, but we'll explore these and if you've got questions about them, just jump in and ask in the chat here. The first thing we're going to talk about is administrative access. And there are a lot of organizations, a lot of offices, both medical and dental offices, they grew up and built out their networks just kind of pieces at a time. And they have specific tools or workstations that anybody can use. And the logging in is a little bit fuzzy of who logs in where. But one of the things that they don't always do a great job is locking down administrative access. If you're not an IT security professional, personnel who's actually needs that administrative access to create users, to configure the systems, you shouldn't be having administrative access. Administrative access is things that are anything above what a general user would have. So if you are, like I said, setting up a new user, if you are installing software, that you need administrative access to do that. And on a day-to-day basis, users should not have that privilege. The challenge with administrative access, if I'm a hacker, that's the first thing I'm going to try and get. If I have malware, if I'm a piece of malware, I'm going to look for the systems that have administrative access or the users that have administrative access, because if I can hack into their system, I then have administrative access. And so the way that you combat that is just don't give it to people who don't need it, and have your administrators only use it when they need it. Avoid it at all costs, because the best thing you can do for malware is not give administrative access. It doesn't have anywhere to go sometimes. Sometimes it just stops it right there. If it doesn't have administrative access, it can't install itself. It can't propagate itself throughout the network. So work with your IT service provider and try to limit administrative access as best you can. 97% of Microsoft vulnerabilities will be mitigated by removing administrative rights. So if you just could take away that one thing, if I could help, I've talked with insurance companies, I've talked with all different types of industries, and they say, what are the 3 things we could be doing? And always on one of the top of the list is lock down administrative access. It can do a lot to help your organization reduce its risk. The next thing is backup and recovery. And I want to point out something here. You're going to see a discrepancy between here and an earlier slide I had. You see on the top right, there it says a new organization will fail. Oh, on the top left, a new organization will fall victim to ransomware every 14 seconds in 2020 and every 11 seconds in 2021. And if you remember, there was an earlier slide I had, I didn't point it out, but it said that this year, 2021, a new organization falls victim to ransomware every 5 seconds. Well, the difference here is that this statistic was estimated in 2019. So in 2019, at the end of 2019, they said, listen, in 2020, every 14 seconds, someone's going to fall victim to ransomware. And they estimated that by 2021, every 11 seconds, someone's going to. But because of COVID and a number of other things that happened, where we all transitioned to being more online, that went from that estimate of 11 seconds. The reality was it came in every 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds, an organization's falling victim to ransomware. It's a huge challenge and a huge risk. And there's all different types of ransomware that's coming out, all different new ones. I could show you, sometimes I do these presentations, I show organizations, I show the people participating a website that's actually the black market, and it's ransomware as a service. It's actually, you can go out there, if I'm a cyber criminal, I can get an account with this organization online on the dark web. I can upload a list of email addresses and it'll take care of everything. It'll send out the ransomware, it'll track who clicks on that, it'll send out the ransomware notices, and it'll collect the Bitcoin from them and convert it to dollars. And all I do is sit there and watch the money come in. So ransomware is a huge challenge and risk for organizations. And one of the best things you can do is have good backups of your data. Because if you've got good backups, they can encrypt your stuff all day and you just override all that encrypted data with your clean backups. So making sure you've got good backup data that is separate from your network. Remember that ransomware will get onto everything it can, but make sure that it's actually separated from your network. That's one of the best things you can do as an organization, is to have that backup. Email gateway security. Now, when we talk about email, one of the best ways that ransomware gets on is through email. Users clicking on links, and that link basically gets the criminal access to the system. And 90% of all cyber attacks begin with a phishing email. And I outlined sort of the flow chart here of what happens. But for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over that. But the whole idea is that email is a huge gateway for cyber attacks. And what we want to do is put in place email gateway security software. Office 365's got some tools that you can put in that'll do email gateway. Other ones are Proofpoint, Mimecast. These are tools that basically monitor email coming in and identify where there's a potential malware, and they stop it before it even gets on. So your user never even sees it. And so we're trying to stop the attack before it even gets to a user. So we're going to train our employees to not click on links, but if we can, let's let them not even see those malicious emails in the first place. So look for email security software. Email phishing exercises. This is an example of one of the alerts that we give individuals as we do email phishing exercises with our clients. An email phishing exercise is where we actually simulate exactly what a hacker would do. We send phishing emails to employees. We try to get them to click on the links, and when they do, we give them some training and we give them some education to say, like, you click on this link and here's some things to look for and be careful about. And so you kind of address the issue where the problem is. And organizations that sometimes start with 40 or 50% click rates, which is really high, we can usually get those down to under 10%, sometimes even under 5% people clicking on it, just through education. And that reduces your risk considerably. Endpoint protection is an area that is getting more and more attention. When we talk about endpoints, we're talking about where the data ends up. If I'm sitting on my laptop and I send a request out and say, show me the email, show me the home screen for google.com. Well, Google gets that request and sends it back, and my computer is the endpoint. That's where the endpoint's where the data is ending up. And so an endpoint is a laptop. It's a workstation. So these might look just like the ones you have in your office, or you might have some older offices, and ones like on the right here, this old 386, maybe that's a 486 IBM, or like this one down here. This is the first picture of just like the first computer I ever owned, this Commodore 64. You don't see those many often anymore, but mostly we see these endpoints here, and that's where the hackers are now trying to attack, at the endpoint, because it's the users that are clicking on the links and they're going to deploy their software and their malware on those endpoints. So if we can protect the endpoints, it can go a long way to protecting the organization. And a lot of organizations will have things like Norton Antivirus or Symantec. They'll have McAfee, and these are all antivirus softwares, which is a form of endpoint protection. What we want to do is transition away from some of these older anti-malware software into what's called next generation endpoint protection. Tools like Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, they are a much more advanced endpoint protection, malware detection system. And they use some more advanced mechanisms and tools like artificial intelligence and data mining to be able to look for behaviors. So now I'm just not saying when it's looking through your network or through your computer, it's not saying that looks like a malicious file because of the name. I know the name of that, and it's just like the name of this malicious file I have on my list. It does more than that. It goes and says that this particular piece of software is acting funny. It's not acting in the way it's normally supposed to act. So I'm going to keep an eye on it, or I'm going to quarantine it. And what these tools can do is, if you get something like ransomware, they can actually be set up to stop that malware, that ransomware on that system before it even goes out and tries to encrypt other systems. So these new endpoint protection tools are very powerful and they're very useful. And they cost a little bit more, but it's worth the cost because they're going to protect you a lot better. Just a couple more here. A firewall with security services. We see a lot of medical and dental offices who struggle with this because they've got a firewall that maybe they put in 10 years ago. They bought it at Best Buy. Even maybe their service provider provided one to them, but it doesn't have great security services on it. It's just the older firewalls are limited in what they can do. But new firewalls with security services built in can do a lot to protect your organization. And just there's a lot of data, a lot of activity going on here, but I'm going to show you. This represents the firewall. And this is an email that's coming in from the outside to get into my network to an authorized user in here. But it's got an exploit, basically it has a piece of malware on there that's trying to get confidential data. And it's coming in, and the email doesn't even know it's there, and the user wouldn't even know it's there. It's hidden inside this email. But as it comes to the firewall can pick those packets apart. It can find that email and see what it looks like and see that it has something malicious, pull it out, put the pieces back together and send it on to the authorized user. The authorized user might not even know that exploit was there. The firewalls can do a whole lot to protect your organization if they're set up correctly. So if you have questions about your firewall, you should be talking to a security professional, because at the end of the day, firewall is not an IT mechanism. It really is a security mechanism. Multi-factor authentication. Every organization should be looking at this, and you've probably seen some of the organizations or companies you do business with already put this in place. Maybe your bank already uses multi-factor authentication. What multi-factor authentication is the idea that, well, when we talk about authentication, we're talking about the computer knowing who I am. And traditionally, what we've done is said, well, if you want to know who I am or authenticate that I am who I say I am, I'm going to have a password, and I know the password and nobody else knows the password. So the computer asks me the password, I can type the password, and the computer says, must be Anders, because I know that he knows the password. What we're trying to do is get away from just having that single point of authentication and say, all right, now you need two things, at least two things, to authenticate yourself to the system. And we say that you need to have something you know, something you are, or something you have. You need one of each of these to have multi-factor authentication. So you'll see banks or Google account, your Gmail account will set this up where once you type in your password, it's going to say, okay, thanks for your password. Now I've just sent a PIN number to the cell phone that we have for you on file. And once you get that PIN number, type it in, and then we're going to give access. Well, now it's authenticated you through something that you know, your password, and something you have, your phone, the PIN. You can only know that PIN if you have that phone. So we need to put this in place because this can reduce the risk of breach by up to 98%. It's a huge mechanism for protecting your organization. Remember I told you earlier, people said, what are the three things you could do? I talked about administrative access. The other thing I say is put in place multi-factor authentication. Those are the 7 things, the foundational things that you should be looking at. And I threw one more in there. I know it's not 7, and I apologize, but perform ongoing security training and train your employees. make sure they understand their roles, have an annual training. A lot of your offices probably have requirements for HIPAA training and privacy training, and you can buy packages now that will have security awareness and HIPAA and privacy training all in one package. And so just have this coming out every year and have security be a part of that requirement, because it can really help you in reducing your risk, because security is, at the end of the day, not a people issue. It is really, or not a technology issue, it's a people issue. All right. The key takeaways as I wrap up here. Your data has never been more at risk than it is today. That's just the reality of what we live in. And the costs of a cyber incident are going up. And it's not just the financial cost you have to think about. You have to think about the reputational cost. Every breach that includes healthcare data or HIPAA data is reportable, and it has to be reported to HHS. And that's public knowledge that's out there. So to protect yourself, your reputation, then you really need to be thinking proactively. And luckily, there are some preventative things you can do to minimize your risk. We've talked about what some of these things are today. These 7 fundamental things can really help your organization be protected. And lastly, now's the time to get involved. Don't wait any longer. The cost becomes greater if you wait. Start thinking about what you can do and put some of these things in place. And if some of the things we talked about today, you're wondering, well, where do I start? How do I begin this? Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We got security professionals who would love to help you put in place the things that'll protect you. And if you have an IT service provider and you're wondering, well, have they got the right security in place? We work with IT service providers all the time to make sure that they've got the appropriate security, to help advise them on how they can help you be more secure, and advise you on how you can make your IT service provider more accountable for the security they should have in place. I appreciate it. I'm looking here to see if we have any questions. I don't see more questions.
I don't see any, Anders. You did a fantastic job. I have a question for you. What struck me is you said 90% of these breaches happen because of a phishing email. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So is there any way, if we do all these 7 things that you're suggesting, that when the bad guys try and come in and hack, it's kind of like when you go to a house and you see a Ring doorbell system and there's cameras and signs, the bad guys are going to go where it's easy to get in. Is that the same with cybersecurity?
It absolutely is. You can never reduce your risk completely to 100%. You can never be completely secure. What you want to do is build in layers of security, and all you're trying to do is make the hackers feel like, you know what, I can spend my time better over here. You want them just to try a couple things, it doesn't work, and move on. So put these layers of security in place. Putting these layers of security, these 7 things in place, will begin to help you protect you, and just that you are not going to be the easiest thing they get into, and they're going to move on quickly.
And I want to throw one more thing at you, Anders. We have clients who have their brother-in-law's sister's 3rd cousin removed is their computer IT guy.
Right.
And that is a concern. If you don't have somebody, and again, Anders, I'm sure, has people, upside down and sideways of people that can do this. There are dental specific IT professionals that I know of that I'm sure are very good at this. If you're not working with somebody, folks, who is talking to you about these issues, then you need to talk to somebody else, because this is real. These bad guys are really smart, right?
Yeah, I mean, take this list, take these slides and the 7 fundamental things to your IT service provider and say, what can you do for me to set these 7 things up? More than likely, they can help you. But if they don't give you answers, like if you're not feeling getting warm fuzzies, that they know what they're talking about, or if you have questions about what they're asking, talk to a security professional. I mean, we'd be more than happy to get involved in that.
Yeah, and again, Anders and his team, they do this every single day. If you have any questions, email him, email me. I'll connect you with all of them. But again, this is just so critical because it could blow up your whole business. I mean, and you've seen businesses go out of business because of this, I'm sure.
Yep, it's true.
Yeah,
they do. So I could tell you more stories, but lots of war stories. But we'll get on with the rest of the presentation.
Anders, thank you so much for your great information and your expertise. Amanda, can you, again, just for folks that want, can you put Anders' number up one more time in case they have any questions? And we'll do this with Brandon too as we go to him. Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories. I heard something, they were talking about 60 Minutes, how a lot of these guys, they said they go after government agencies and school districts, and they go after $50,000, $75,000 because if they try to ask for $10 million, they know they're not going to get it. But I don't know how true that is.
Well, I get you're going to get me talking here, and I know we got to move on to Brandon's presentation. But what we learned from, if you remember, there was a breach by, oh dang it, I'm going to forget now. The credit agency, the credit monitoring agency, Experian. I apologize, but there was a breach that took place about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And what they found was it attacked tens of thousands of organizations in Europe and in Asia. And what they found was the ransoms were about $500. And what was happening was the criminals were recognizing that if they asked for large amounts of ransom, it attracted more attention and more people reported it, and they were going to get on more people's radar. So they were going over quantity over quality. And they were basically just saying, we're going to hit 10,000 people asking for $500, and we're going to get it, and we're going to make a lot of money doing it. So what we learned is that you're never too small to fly under the radar. All you need is an email address, and you could be a victim.
We're actually doing good on time. I do have a couple more minutes. We did have a question. One of our participants is asking about business associate agreements. How does this factor into all of this?
Any more context in what that is? Like, our business associates?
No, that's I think they're talking about like with HIPAA firms and things like that. Maybe. No. Well,
I think that whatever agreements you've got, the security needs to be a part of those agreements and make sure that whatever requirements we have or expectations we have, we're pushing down those agreements specifically. I'm sorry if I didn't answer directly what. With your computer IT guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got an IT guy and he's got you got agreements with them, you need to make sure that the expectations are set on what security should be in place. And a lot of times, what we see is those agreements will very lightly touch on security. But we need to make sure we're saying, well, here's what the expectations are. They'll have service level agreements for like uptime and how much time they're going to expect to be up, or how quick their service is going to be. We need to set service level agreements for security and the things that they're going to be doing for us for security. And so we've helped organizations as they're going into contract negotiations for renewal with their IT guy to make sure that they've got the appropriate protections and expectations set in those agreements. And if they're not willing to do that, it's really worth looking into some potential options because there's lots of IT service providers, and it might cost you a little more, but it's worth it if you know you've got peace of mind because they've got security in place. It's good to inject a security conversation into that IT relationship, and most IT service providers are willing to have it. Usually, it means that you're gonna have to pay a little bit more to get that security service, but it's worth it, and they're willing to offer it. You just have to have a conversation.
Anders, you're amazing. Thank you so much for your great insight and information. And guys, here's his contact information, or you can get to me and I'll get you to Anders and his team. Thank you so much for your great information tonight on cybersecurity. And it's something we all have to be worried about, and we all have to watch. Unfortunately, the bad guys aren't going away. So thank you so much, Anders.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, you too. All right, the next victim is Brandon Waldron. I call you a victim, Brandon, if that's okay. Brandon was actually on my podcast. If you guys have an opportunity, I do now every other week podcast called The Art of Dental Finance and Management. Brandon was a guest. We talked about internal controls. About 10 years ago, I got a call from one of my clients who I've known for years, and she was in tears and said, Art, I just found out today that my sister is embezzling me. What do I do? I don't know if you have an answer for that, but I've heard statistics that one out of every 5 healthcare professionals will be embezzled during their lifetimes. I'm sure Brandon's got much better statistics than I have. So Brandon is going to talk to us about internal controls, embezzlement, how it works. We're not going to teach you how to embezzle. people. We're going to show you how to prevent it. So Brandon Waldron is a senior manager. He's out of Northern California. He assists our clients at Eide Bailey in understanding their internal control weaknesses that can lead to a material misstatement or fraud. If fraud is suspected or discovered, Brandon works diligently to understand the extent of the damage and how to prevent it from happening again. Brandon is a CPA. He's a certified fraud examiner, and he is a certified forensic interviewer. And he does works with lots and lots of clients, has articles in all different industries, including healthcare. So Brandon, I want to thank you for coming on today. Amanda, if you could take us back to where Brandon is, where his part of the presentation starts, we would appreciate it. And so Brandon, how long have you been doing this work?
I've been doing this work and it's specifically in fraud and forensics for 2 years, but I've been in public accounting for 9 years.
Okay.
And during the course of that time, I've had each step of my career has been leading me to fraud and forensics. So I'm happy that I'm here because I've had all kinds of stories I've accumulated over the past 9 years dealing with all kinds of different industries and clients.
I would imagine, and I'll just ask one question. What has, I would have to think that during a pandemic where people are suffering, fraud and embezzlement in businesses is going up and not down.
I would say this. I would say that there's no way to officially prove that, but what I would say with certainty is that because of the pandemic and because of some people being stuck at home during the shutdown, people are spending more time looking at their books and reviewing documentation, and they're finding that fraud's been occurring for the last 4 or 5 years, but they're finally bringing it to the attention. So yes, business has definitely gone up for us, whether or not it's because of fraud is happening within the pandemic, or if it's just because people are finally having time to look at their books and records and look at their procedures, who knows?
All right, well, listen, I will turn the stage over to you, and folks, you're going to get a lot of information about things. We talked about cybersecurity, and we combined cybersecurity and fraud and embezzlement because there is overlap to some extent. And Brandon is an expert. He's going to talk to you about how does it happen and what do you do if you find it. So Brandon, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Art. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for anybody who's listening. Hopefully I can provide you all with some helpful hints to help protect your company. As Anders has stated, cybersecurity is a very big deal, and I really appreciate all the information that he provided. To summarize it, his presentation was all about people attacking you from the outside of your practice. Unfortunately, mine is within. Fraud happens particularly within the practice, and that typically has a lot of damages with it as well. And unfortunately, there's a lot of trust that is damaged as well. So some of the recommendations I'm going to give you here today are to hopefully hold on to that trust and hopefully prevent some damages from happening. All right, let's see here if I have control of the presentation. Amanda, I do not have control of the presentation. There we go. Now I do. All right. So we're going to start with fraud statistics. What's the statistics currently for fraud? For dental practice, according to the National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association, out of the $250 billion spent on dental care procedures annually, an estimate of $12.5 billion, or 5%, is lost to dental fraud, waste, and abuse. 12.5 billion. That's a lot of money. According to an American Dental Association survey, 35% of the dental practices have embezzlement once and 17 more a second time. So we have about 60 people here today. That means 20 of you probably have had embezzlement happen in your practice. And of that 20, 10 of them probably have had it happen a second time. This is real serious stuff that we're talking about here. In general, these are just general fraud statistics. Most fraud goes undetected for 14 months, and the median loss per month is $8,300. So every time you're reviewing your monthly reconciliation, keep that in mind. That could be $8,300 that's going out the door. Number one category of fraud committed, billing fraud. 40% of fraud was concealed by creating physical false documents. 40%. creating physical false documents. Someone has the time to create these false documents. 36% was concealed by altering physical documents, meaning that they were real and they were real documents, they just altered it a little bit. 27% altered electronic documents or files, and 26 created fraudulent electronic documents. These are real statistics, people. 46% of the victim organizations declined to refer cases to law enforcement. So as we go through and I talk about all the other statistics and all the other information I have for you, please keep in mind, everything is underreported, because guess what? 46% of the victim organizations decline to refer the cases to law enforcement. And if they don't go to law enforcement, sometimes these statistics aren't necessarily caught. So something to keep in mind for the future. All right, so just brief descriptions here from the Office of Inspector General. Fraud is the wrongful or criminal deception intended as a result in financial or personal gain. This includes false representation of fact, making false statements, or by concealment of information. Waste is thoughtless or careless expenditure, mismanagement, or abuse of resources. And abuse is excessive or improper use of a thing, or to use something in a manner contrary to the natural or legal rules of its use. So going forward, when I talk about some of these particular controls and things like this, I want you to keep these definitions in mind, because it's going to help you understand what I mean by this is open to waste, this is open to fraud, this is open to abuse. All right, so fraudster, what do they look like? Well, clarifying red flag behaviors according to the ACFE, which by the way is the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. In 52% of the cases, the fraudster exhibited red flags. So about half of the cases where someone was caught, they showed these type of particular traits. The top three that I would definitely recommend that we pay attention to is unusually close association with a vendor or customer, control issues, unwillingness to share duties, and irritability, suspiciousness, or defensiveness. So sometimes that good employee that does everything and gets everything done, unfortunately could be the one employee that's stealing from you. Something to keep in mind. In 63% of the cases, the fraudster exhibited the red flag behaviors for personal life descriptions, which, as you can see here, the top three are living beyond one's means, financial difficulties, divorce and family problems. These are real things that cause someone to feel the pressure of committing fraud, because they're like, you know what? I got this divorce. It's killing me. I'm having a hard time fighting my divorce lawyer. I want my kid. I need to definitely make these lawyer payments so I don't lose them. I'm going to commit fraud and pay this guy the money. It does sometimes happen. It's sad, but unfortunately, those are things that we need to keep in mind. Now, that doesn't mean that if someone in your practice is having a divorce that you suspect them of fraud. What that means, though, is that if there's multiple things happening and you see some of this also happening, then there could be fraud that's currently happening. Types of fraud in a dental practice. So this is right here is a lovely picture of all the different types of fraud that can occur in any business. But what we do here is we narrow it down to these 6 main types of fraud: billing schemes, cash larceny, cash skimming, check tampering, expense reimbursement fraud, and payroll fraud. Now, the difference between cash larceny and cash skimming is that cash larceny means that the funds or the cash was taken after it was recorded in the books. Cash skimming means that it is stolen before it's recorded or before it hits the books. Now, what does that mean? That typically means that when we see statistics, that cash larceny is actually higher than cash skimming. Why is that? Not because there's less people stealing money out before it hits the books, but because so many people steal before it hits the books that we can't keep track of it and it's hard to get caught. So even though you may look at numbers and think to yourself, okay, cash larceny is the one that I should be concerned about, it's actually cash skimming that is just as important and just as bad. Another type that isn't really necessarily listed in the previous slide was corruption. As we stated in 2 slides back, being very close to a vendor or a customer. This is where this particularly comes in. So there's conflicts of interest, bribery, illegal gratuities, and economic extortion. All 4 of these are difficult to prove because obviously, usually it includes 2 or more people to commit it. So here are some examples that I thought of that we could give in regards to these particular types of problems. So examples of conflicts of interest. An office manager of a dental office has a brother that sells masks. The office manager tells the owner that the brother's business is the best place to buy masks without disclosing that it is their brother that owns the business. More than likely, if you do business with the brother, you don't know if that brother's prices is the best. You don't know if that brother's business has the best reputation or if their masks are reliable. Again, there's all kinds of different things that get secluded there. And the whole point is to benefit, obviously, the brother's business. Office managers offered $100 to cancel someone's appointment and replace it with a relative, friend, or other patient. That would be bribery. Example of illegal gratuities. Office manager receives a $100 bottle of wine from a staff member. The staff member had stolen $60 from the deposit and the office manager didn't say anything, although they noticed it. So what's the main difference here is between the two is one of them is planned. The other one is not planned, but they still get the reward anyway. So that's the two differences between the two. And then of course, economic extortion, which is commonly known, AKA as blackmail. Staff member is aware that they might be caught for their stealing of funds. They grab confidential files and threat to disclose confidential information unless the company promises to forgive the theft. I bring this up specifically for two reasons. One is obviously to describe to you an example of economic extortion. The second reason, though, is to bring up the point that if someone is committing theft of funds in one area, they will not hesitate to do something in a different area to either get out of it or to steal more funds. So even if you think someone is committing fraud, let's say in a payroll scheme, you have to also be on the lookout for them possibly committing fraud in other types of fraud schemes. Something to keep in mind. Okay, the next two slides are probably the most important and probably the two slides I want you to memorize. These are the most two things I want you to walk away. If you don't listen to me for the rest of the presentation, please listen to these next two slides. They are extremely important, okay? So the first one is the definition of internal control. It is a process or procedure in place to prevent, detect, or correct a mistake, whether that mistake be made of human error or fraud. I'm gonna repeat it again like they do in high school. A process or procedure in place to prevent, detect, or correct a mistake, whether that mistake be made by human error or fraud. I bring this up twice for one reason. One time I had a presentation, someone asked me, well, Brandon, I haven't had any fraud, so I must have pretty good internal controls. And I said, well, that may be the case, but have you had a mistake? And they said, of course. And I said, okay, well, who caught the mistake? And they said, the auditor did. And I said, okay, well, then your internal controls are good, but they're not really good, because the goal of internal control is to prevent or detect or correct a mistake, whether it be by human error or fraud. So when we talk about internal controls going forward here, that's what we're shooting for. That's what we're going for. Okay, so now I want to talk about these particular procedures that you might see in a dental practice or other type of business and try to identify with you whether they are internal control or not. So having a receptionist open the mail, would that prevent, detect, or correct a mistake? Probably not. Probably not. Maybe if the receptionist is opening the mail and recording the mail and giving the, and holding that list and then giving the mail to another person and you're comparing the lists, maybe that might be an internal control. But more likely just the receptionist opening the mail, not internal control. Placing cash in a closed and locked safe before the deposit is made. This is an internal control. It's a prevention. I am preventing someone from stealing money or from accidentally making a mistake in the deposit by keeping it safe in a safe. So it's a preventative control. Placing cash in an open and unlocked safe before the deposit is made. So if the previous one was an internal control, we would obviously say this one's not an internal control. Why? Because guess what? Someone could come in and steal money and also possibly make the deposit incorrectly. So with that in mind, our goal is to always have the safe closed. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how many businesses, how many government agencies or entities or anything that I've gone into where I see that the safe is left open. They think, well, I'm going to be in and out of there, I might as well keep it open. Unfortunately, that's not internal control, and it does leave you any business susceptible to fraud or any other type of theft. Having the office manager sign off on the cash count sheet before deposit. This is, oh, sorry, I meant to hit the depends there on the section. So the depends goes to the having the office manager sign off on the cash count sheet before deposit. Again, it depends. More than likely, it's for detection. If they are the ones that are signing off on the cash count sheet and they are the ones that filled out the cash count sheet, then it's not an internal control. But if someone else separate from them prepared the count sheet and they are the ones reviewing it and signing off on it, then that is an internal control. Accounting software automatically balances an entry. This is definitely internal control, and this is a correction internal control. So I wanted to provide everyone here with an example that, again, internal control is to prevent, detect, and correct any mistakes, whether they be by human error or by fraud. And then office manager records the cash collected and places it in the safe. This is not an internal control. Why is it not internal control? We're going to go over that here shortly. I have people sometimes tell me, well, Brandon, any recommendation you give on internal controls, typically I can't do because I have a very small office. Is there any recommendations that you would give to me? I always give this one recommendation right here. Stay away from the ARC problem. So no one in the office should have 2 or more of the tasks listed here to the left. If they do, then the office has no segregation of duties and you're open to mistakes, you're open to fraud, you're open to all kinds of different things. So the 3 different tasks are summarized as authorization, recording, and custodial. So authorization, the person in charge of approving something. Recording, the person in charge of recording it in the books or in the software. And custodial, the person in charge of holding something. They're the ones that actually have possession of the cash, actually have possession of the checkbook, actually have possession of the files. All of this, that's custodial. There is not one of these 3 jobs that one person should have 2 of them on. So if they have recording and authorization, there's a problem. If they have custodial and recording, that's usually a problem. And unfortunately, that's probably the one that's the most common. If there's 2 that are typically paired together, it's recording and custodial, and that is still a problem. So let me give you an example. I'm a receptionist or I'm an office clerk. Someone comes up and hands me $20. And I'm short for lunch. And then their $20 they gave me was 2 10s. I could swipe that 10, which is one $10 bill for lunch, deposit, have the other 10 to give to the deposit, and I record that only 10 was received and not 20. It does happen, and we want to stay away from that. If someone else had been handed the full 20, somebody other than me, obviously I couldn't swipe the 10. I couldn't swipe that 10. Same with the recording. If I'm recording the 20 and someone else has the money, obviously I can't swipe it. So although you may have a small practice, this is definitely something you should ask yourself. If I look at the employees I have, does each one of them only have 1 of these, or do they have 2 of them? So this is just in general for everything related to accounting. Don't leave cash unattended or in an unsafe place. I know that seems common sense, but unfortunately it does happen. Recommend 2 people for everything. CYA, have a witness cover you for everything that you say, do, have them sign off on everything. Because if there's 2 people signing off on everything, then unless there's coercion going on, the chances of there being a problem are very unlikely. Stay away once again from the ARC problem. And 5, have all procedures and policies documented. Turnover happens. It's part of life. And if it happens and it's not documented, then everything that they used to do gets missed or forgotten, or it gets blended into someone else's job, which unfortunately leaves it more open to fraud. In addition to that, unfortunately, there are some times where something may happen and someone may, steal funds from you, and there's that possibility that, things aren't documented. And so it's like, okay, well, did they not really know that they weren't supposed to do that? Or were they stealing from me? Obviously, if it's documented and they know what the policies are, then it's kind of harder to prove that they did it on accident or by mistake. So I'm going to go into cash receipt internal controls quickly. So there's 5 steps to cash receipts: collecting, receiving, recording, reconciling, and depositing. In general, for this, have an established policy for making deposits. Have it be, deposit needs to happen every day, every week, every 2 weeks, whatever is best for your practice and best for the people who's doing the deposits. But it needs to be consistent. If you do that, it makes your life so much more easier in detecting fraud or mistakes. Because obviously if the auditor comes in and you say, hey, they're supposed to be making deposits every 2 weeks, they can get a list of the deposits, specifically look down the list and go, yep, every 2 weeks. Nope. Oh, there's 2 here that are out of 2 weeks. Why is that? Inquire. Again, there's things that makes things go a lot quicker that way. Have a pre-printed cash count sheet. This stops individuals from creating altered count sheets. In my history, in my experience, it does happen. I had one particular, it was not a dentist practice, it was a different entity. But what they did do is they took the person who was committing the fraud, actually went and eliminated the $5 bill column. I don't know, they ended up stealing money that way because no one noticed that the $5 bill column suddenly went missing. And so now suddenly they have to go through and specifically be like, wow, we need to obviously prevent that and move forward with that. Oh, sorry, I accidentally hit that. Okay. Summary is not okay. Be as detailed as possible. Detail is great. Detail makes it easier for owners to review and makes it easier for anyone to understand from a 1,000-foot level what is going on. Okay. Procedures for cash receipt cycle. As we stated earlier, this is just me kind of giving you some examples, and I'm not going to touch on this so much because I want to get to some of the other categories. But the point of the matter is this: have 2 individuals at the front desk, one for custody and one for recording. Person 1 who collects the cash and checks goes immediately and places it in the safe. Person 2 records the cash and checks that was collected in the system, provides a receipt to the patient. I'm trying to show everyone here that the whole thing about the ARC problem. This is the way, and again, this is just with 2 people. At the end of the day, whether depositing the funds or not, a collections report should be printed. Recommended this be on the owner or another person who is not recording the information. Person 1 making the deposit grabs the cash, fills out a printed count sheet. Person 2 counts the cash again and verifies the accuracy and signs it. Person 1 takes the deposit, fills out the deposit slip and deposits in the bank. Person number 1 takes the deposit receipt, hands it to person number 2. Person 2 will then place the receipt with the deposit paperwork that is filed. So just now we have 2 people that pretty much did all of the different types of controls that we would need. And again, even though the office is 2, we still were able to work it that way. Here's some stuff for the deposit paperwork. All sub receipts, cash count sheets, bank deposit slips, bank deposit receipts. There's so much here that could go through. Art, I saw that your camera turned on.
I did. We have some questions whenever you want to take them.
Wow. Okay. That either says that I am not as good as talking as Anders was, or I have a lot, or is it because I'm in fraud and everyone wants to ask fraud questions? What do you think?
I would go for the second one. So can we take, is this a good place to take them or do you want to wait a minute?
Why don't we go ahead and take them real quick? And then once I'm done with these questions, I actually need to quickly plug in my computer just to make sure I don't lose my battery.
That would be a good idea. Okay. So first question is, if I have security cameras on the, if I have security cameras on the front office staff when opening mail and cash transactions, would that be enough to prevent fraud? Why or why not?
That's a great question, and it's actually a yes and a no answer. So it is good in the partial to prevent fraud, because what it does is it shows people that, number 1, you're taking fraud seriously. And number 2, it also stops them from thinking, okay, no one's watching me. And if someone's watching you, naturally you kind of get nervous. It's the same way when I'm driving and I got a cop behind me. I could be in the perfect speed limit, going exactly and doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, but naturally because a cop's behind me, I'm a little nervous and I'm watching him. So I think it's good for the prevention. However, with that being said, there are other ways to skin a cat. Just because they're not swiping the money underneath the table because they know the camera's there, doesn't mean that fraud is not occurring. In addition to that, they have to be under the assumption that you're actually looking at the camera. You know, a great example that always blows my mind is when we found out that BART had fake cameras, that they had them there, but no one was, they weren't recording anything. And so because they weren't recording anything, a lot of stuff didn't get caught. So Do I think they're a good thing? Yes, I do. I would say, to make that better though, state that someone, somehow, some way, in a respective way, tell the staff those tapes are being watched. And number two, even when you're watching the tapes, I would be surprised if you saw someone deliberately swipe something under the table. But fraud could still be occurring even though you have a camera at that particular site. Hopefully that answers that person's question.
And the thing is, Brandon, is that I find where the business owners, whether they're dentists or anybody else, where the staff, the team knows that the owner is watching, they're less likely to do it as opposed to maybe the doctor who just trusts everybody. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay. All right, let's go to our next question.
Okay.
How often should an audit of write-offs, cash discounts, and other adjustments be performed? And should the doctor do this? I was actually going to ask you that question at the end, but here it is.
Okay. I would say this. I would say, how often should audit of write-offs, cash discounts, and other adjustments be performed? I would say at a minimum once a month, and that could be done when you're doing the bank reconciliations, but that's at a minimum. I would say, obviously, any write-off or cash discounts, I feel some communications should be provided. Think of it like when you go to a store. If I go to Macy's and I'm getting a refund or something, the person who's checking me out always has to go to that manager and say, hey, am I okay to do this? Kind of the same thing here. At a minimum, do it once a month. Should the doctor do this? It's a great question, and here's going to be my official answer on it. If the doctor does it, good, great protection. If the doctor doesn't do it, then the office, I'm assuming the office manager would be the person second to do it. I would recommend that office manager, they make sure that there's nothing that they get out of it as well. Meaning if the office manager is the person who's coming by, if the person at the front desk is going to the office manager for the approval of the write-offs and the cash discounts and the other adjustments, then obviously they may not be the best person to do the review because maybe they have something in it for them. And so of course they'll approve it, and then no one else is watching their own review. So is it necessary that a doctor does it? Not necessarily, but obviously we want to make sure that, again, we stay away from the ARC problem and that the office manager doesn't have the authorization and the recording. If they're the ones recording the write-offs and the cash discounts and the other adjustments, then the doctor.
Oh, I think we just lost Brandon. Hopefully he will be able to plug back in here. I will tell you, folks, I've looked at adjustment reports on Dentrex and EagleSoft and Open Dental, and there are lots of different categories. You have bartering, you have your PPO discounts, and I think whether you do it every week, every month, whenever, you really need to look at those adjustments and ask, especially miscellaneous adjustments. So for example, Mrs. Smith comes into the office, has her teeth cleaned for $120, hands the front office person $120 of cash. Mrs. Smith gets a bill that shows it's paid, but it's adjusted off of her account as a miscellaneous adjustment. So I've looked at these reports under miscellaneous adjustments, and I find lots of things. One of the other things that Dentrex and EagleSoft provide is you want to be looking at your collections reports. And the collection reports, and I don't know if Brandon's going to get to this, but you want to look at your collection reports, and you're going to compare your collection report from Dentrex to a bank. There's going to be a day sheet. You look at your day sheet. This is how much money was collected. This is cash, check, credit card, care credit, whatever it's going to be. And then that amount is then compared to a bank deposit. So, someone is going to make a bank deposit. You should be depositing every single day if you can, because I have people that have told me that we go once or twice a week or once every week, and checks get lost, cash tends to get lost. So we're reconciling the day sheet. We're reconciling the day sheet to the to the bank statement, to the bank reconciliation, and all of those things should reconcile. Very important. I think we have Brandon back.
Well, there was good news to that and bad news to that. The good news is that I think that was God helping me out and giving me time to put the battery in, but it was not the battery, it was my internet. So sorry about that.
No worries. Brandon, while you were away, I was mentioning about looking at adjustment reports on Dentrix and Eaglesoft, and I was also talking about taking their day sheets and reconciling the day sheets with the bank deposit and with the bank statement reconciliation, all of which hopefully are done by other people. So, okay, let's go. I've got a couple more questions for you.
Go ahead.
One of our listeners is saying what you brought up before. What happens when you only have one front office person who does everything? That's a little tougher, isn't it?
It is. So this is what I'll say. If there's one person that is doing everything, then unfortunately it does force the doctor to be highly more involved in the person reviewing everything. Because obviously we want to make sure if it's their practice that they know what's going on and that everything is okay. Or if the doctor doesn't have the time or doesn't really know what to look for, then it's recommended that they outsource it to their CPA or their accountant that could review everything. I've had it be where there was one person that was doing everything, and then the third-party CPA or third-party accountant or auditor was coming in and reviewing everything, and then signing off, yes, it was okay, or no, it was not okay. So unless the doctor wants to get more involved, we need to move on to the other types of third-party individuals to look at.
And then the last question, which is what you kind of just brought up, because I want to get you back to your lecture, is what is the accountant's role in fraud prevention?
What is the accountant's role in fraud prevention? Well, that's a very interesting question, and it comes based on two parts. I guess, is the accountant in-house or is it in-house or out-house?
I would suspect, Brandon, they're talking about, for example, myself, our firm, that we're the CPAs for a dental practice. They send in their monthly check register, their credit card statements, their bank statements. So I will tell you that as a general rule, the work that CPAs do in compiling financial statements or reconciling QuickBooks is generally, and it even says it in a properly drafted engagement letter, which is the ones that I've used in my practices for 36 years, that CPAs are not set up to detect fraud. I mean, they can certainly see when something doesn't look right, but it's really more inside of the office, to some extent.
Yes, and that's true. This is what I'll say, because I used to be an auditor before I moved in fraud and forensics. Auditors are meant to verify the accuracy, completeness of the financial statements in material balances. So obviously they're looking at things from a top level point of view. Now, if they spot fraud, they are responsible to look into it.
Yes.
But they're not looking for fraud versus my
Exactly.
job. I'm actually looking for fraud. I'm going in there and searching for it. So it's a whole different. That's why we have a difference between a financial audit and a forensic audit.
Yeah, and that's why it's important, folks, that you're looking at your day sheets and you're looking at your collections and making sure that, that if you produce 6,000 a day and you're only collecting 3,000, something isn't right. The CPA is doing it after the fact. We get your stuff after the fact. We're seeing pieces of paper. We're not in your office. We don't see the flow. We don't see the things that Brandon has been talking about. So I don't know if the CPA as your accountant is going to be as able to find this as you are inside of your office. All right, Brandon, I want to, and if we run a little over, that's fine. Go ahead and pick up where you left off here.
Absolutely. Amanda, could you please give me the controls once again? For some reason, they have taken it away from me when the internet cut out. I'm going to move forward quickly and just bring up a particular case. I like to show this. Number one, you guys know that we actually do fraud investigations and internal control examinations for dentist practices, but also to show you some of the impact that we have had with these particular cases. So we had an internal control examination audit. That's where we go in and we look at the weaknesses of internal controls and we try to evaluate them and say, okay, this organization has a moderate openness to fraud or mistakes. This one has even, has a higher level of fraud and mistakes. We rate the internal controls and obviously help you by providing recommendations on how to prevent them from happening again. So this was a dental office, 15 individuals. They were using MuleSoft. Owner was nervous that fraud was occurring, so they just called us in to look at their cash receipts. Eide Bailey investigated the cash receipts. We identified 16 adjustments and 226 deleted transactions in the cash receipt cycle. We also identified that the cash box was left unlocked throughout the day. Receipts were not being provided to the patients. Cash deposits were being made on a weekly basis, not daily per office policy. And the person recording the adjustments deletions was the same person in charge of holding and depositing the cash. Needless to say, first we had this ICE audit, which again just goes over us providing recommendations for internal controls. After that, the dental office owner definitely asked us if he should be worried about fraud. We recommended saying, yep, there's a potential that fraud could be occurring. Here's the recommendations, hopefully to avoid it. Okay, Amanda, I do not have the ability to move forward on the presentation. Okay.
Amanda, are you there? Brandon can't move forward on his presentation.
Well, as she's not there, I'll continue to move forward. Cash disbursement cycle was the piece that was next. So cash disbursement, some people think, oh, I just got to worry about cash receipts, people stealing money from the receipts, not necessarily the money going out. That's not the case, unfortunately. Just as much fraud happens as money is going out versus it coming in. And so we definitely want to keep that in mind as you're doing the practices, because definitely when you trust somebody, it's easier for you to sign off on a check. Or my personal favorite, I have the receipt for my reimbursement, but I left it at home. Is it okay if I give it to you tomorrow? And of course, we never hear from it again. So that's definitely something we want to avoid. And so in doing that, my recommendations were going to be this. Number one, do not use a rubber signature stamp for signing checks. I've seen certain practices and industries do that. Do not do that. Counterfeiting happens a lot when you have a rubber stamp. So require an actual signature from an actual person. Have an established policy regarding outstanding checks written. For example, if they're over 90 days, cancel and reissue. That's definitely something that is recommended. And then keep the unwritten checks or credit cards in a safe location, specifically where it is safe, meaning that you're actually locking it up and it's actually in a safe. Procedures that you see for a cash disbursement cycle. Person number one needs to make a purchase. They fill out a purchase request form and submits it to the office manager or to the doctor, depending on how small or big the practice is. Office manager reviews and approves, denies the request. Either way, this needs to be documented. That is something that some people tend to forget, is that you just because if you approve it, that's great. It needs to be documented. But if you reject it, that needs to be documented as well. Because for all you know, that office manager that rejected it leaves, and then a new office manager comes in, and that same person trying to commit expense reimbursement fraud resubmits it again to the new office manager. They don't know it was rejected, and they get it signed off and get reimbursed for it. These are the kind of things that sometimes do happen. Once the office manager approves the purchase can be made. A purchase order should be provided. I know credit cards are used nowadays, especially with COVID. That's fine, but again, a purchase order is really good because that That's proof that an agreement was made, and more importantly, it provides the actual information for the vendor, just in case you come up to it and you have to look into it more as to whether or not they, sorry, I got the questions that popped up on my screen. So
Oh, hey.
that's why I was hesitating there for a second.
Brandon, so Amanda just emailed me. I think you might have control back of your screen. Try it again. Her internet went out for a second.
Okay, good to go. Got it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Okay, and then I say, how do you see deleted transactions? I close every month and they cannot delete anymore. However, within a month, is there a way to see deleted data? There is. There is way to see deleted data within Dentrix and within Eaglesoft. I know you're probably going to ask me where that is. What I would recommend that you do first is at the end of this presentation, we will show my email address. I recommend that you email me directly. It's nothing personal, but as I'm giving all of these, advices and recommendations, one of the things that I have to keep in mind is that I also don't want to teach a potential fraudster how to get away with deleting the deleted data. So obviously, if you would like to ask me that question directly via email, we could talk about that, but I don't want to dispose it here on the in the presentation. And I say that because I had that happen one time. I had that happen where I had someone come to one of my webinars. This is a true story, people. I had someone come to one of my webinars and I gave some information. And literally 3 or 4 months later, I was investigating that individual who attended my webinar for fraud. So it really does happen. So in short, yes, there are ways for us to look into the deleted transactions. And like you said, if you close every month, yes, they can't go back and delete anything, but throughout the month they can, and there are ways to detect that. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so back to the cash disbursements. Invoices should be sent to the office. They should be placed in a specific location indicating that they need to be paid. This is just in case the office manager leaves. If they leave, then how do you know whether or not they paid all the bills that they need to pay? So usually I recommend that invoices be put in a specific location. At a specific time, the office manager prepares the checks and the support documentation. Information is handed to the owner for approval. Checks and support documentation is reviewed by the owner. Owner signs off on the approval and signs off on the checks. Now, why am I saying owner instead of office manager? Again, the owner should be aware, and usually, in my experience, likes to be aware of the expenses going out the door. Now, if this is a large practice, then hopefully you have designated individuals who just have the authorization tasks. And again, that's what you should be asking yourself. Does the person that I have in power, in trust to make decisions, do I keep them within the specific authorization, recording, and custody? If they have 2 or more, then there could be a problem. And then, of course, one of the helpful hints that I do for reviewing is you should ask yourself when you're looking over the specific checks or looking over the support documentation, do I recall approving this expenditure? Do I recall the support, does it support the dental office operations? Can it stand up to public scrutiny that we made this purchase? Did we just order this item recently? Have I heard of this vendor before? How long did it take for the check to cash? I mean, there's so many different questions that me as a forensic auditor would be asking. However, I think the 2 most important ones for anyone who's reviewing the checks to ask would be, do I recall approving this expenditure? And does this support the dental office operations? Those are usually the 2 that I think are great in answering those questions. The reason I bring this up is due to a case. It was a small dental office, less than 10 individuals using Eaglesoft accounting software. The red flag notice was one personal transaction was charged to the company credit card, and it was just one transaction. The suspect confessed to the charge and said they would reimburse the dental office immediately. The owner got nervous just by that one charge and said, "Eide Bailey, could you please come in to investigate?" We were called in to investigate. We took 2 months to investigate 4,136 transactions. Unfortunately, we identified 444 transactions over the course of the 7 years that that office manager was there. The office manager was making disbursements for personal purchases and also putting personal purchases on the company credit card. All in all, unfortunately, that dental practice, again, which was less than 10 individuals, lost $485,000 over the course of 7 years. That's how much was stolen. That person did go to court and that person did get convicted. So that's definitely something that I wanted to share with all of you. Don't just focus on the receipts, focus also on the cash disbursements. Okay. All right, so next section, now that I got the presentation back, monthly reconciliations. In general, have the bank statements be sent directly to the owners, not the person preparing the bank reconciliations. If so, they can falsify a bank statement. If not, then you have the person completing the bank reconciliation be different than the person who's recording the information. Again, there needs to be two separate individuals between reviewing or authorization and the recording. It is recommended that owners review the bank reconciliations after they are completed to make sure the bank statements match the ones that are mailed to them. So let me give you an example. Here's an example of a bank statement. So it shows specifically the beginning balance, deposits, checks. Normally, the business owner would look at this and go, okay, I only had $200 go out. It's COVID time. So that makes sense. Looks pretty good. Guess what? This bank statement has been altered and forged. I forged it. I was the one who did it for this presentation. And as you can see, it looks pretty legitimate. So let me help you and tell you how you would have caught this. Some people always tell me, is it because there's no dollar sign here in the -200? No, that's if this was a completely legitimate bank statement, this wouldn't have a dollar sign right there. That has nothing to do with it. Typically, it has to do with the writing. If you look over here to my right, you'll see that the numbers here, the 0, the 1, the 5, the 30, the $4,370, the text size and the text difference is different than what it is over here on the left, which is different than what it is over here. So again, that's how meticulous the review of a bank statement would need to be. Now, if the bank statement is mailed directly to the owner and the owner directly hands it to the person that's preparing the reconciliation, the chances of that happening are actually significantly reduced. Why? Because they know that the owner has seen the bank statement. So they can't really forge the bank statement. If they can't forge the bank statement, then they're more apt to try to forge the records. And if they try to forge the records, like it or not, that makes them more susceptible to being caught. Okay, so monthly reconciliation. I have interviewed people reviewing bank reconciliations and have asked them, do you understand how to review a bank reconciliation? They say yes. Then I asked them to tell me the formula for doing a bank reconciliation, and they can't do it. So I provided you here with the particular formula for it. So you take the bank statement ending balance, deduct the outstanding checks, which is the checks, obviously, that have been written but have not been cashed or cleared by the bank. Add deposits in transit, minus other credits and debits, and that number should match, the ending number that you get there should match the books. Typically, this is done by the software, and therefore it's a lot easier than that, and some people don't memorize the formula because of it. But like it or not, I've had individuals change Excel documents or change specific things to make it look like, yes, the number matches, but then when you actually type it out, then you actually, when you actually take a calculator and go straight down, you find out, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't match. They're actually $60 off or $50 off. Well, where's that $60 or $50? Everything like that is certainly something that we want to avoid. Things to be on the lookout for: undeposited funds. If the reconciliation is showing a 0 for this balance, you need to check your safe. If you see cash sitting in the safe, then the money probably is not being accounted for, and that's a big problem. If there's a lot of undeposited cash listed, it should show that the office is not, it could show also that the office is not in line with your cash receipt policy of depositing things every week, every month, every day, whatever it was that was previously set. Checks, cleared or outstanding. Review the vendor names of the checks to verify that none appear to be unapproved vendors. How long it takes for the checks to be cashed. Is there one vendor that always seems to take a longer time to cash it than a shorter time? Verify the clear checks of how the signature of the unauthorized or unauthorized checks happen. Deposits. If the office is having collection reports printed every day, the owner can do a quick comparison of them to the deposits that's cleared the bank in order to determine the completeness and accuracy. So I'm using these examples specifically to show that there are a lot of things that should be being checked within the individual bank reconciliation. Now, keeping that in mind though, the one thing that's helpful to realize is that if you're an owner, you don't have the time to do this, you know, all the time, but at the very minimum, the bank reconciliation is where it needs to be done. So for example, let's say you don't have time to check all the daily count sheets every single day. I recommend that that is done, but some people are just too busy. It happens, okay? Well, guess what? Those daily count sheets should be provided to the person who's preparing the reconciliation and definitely the owner, and you could check it then and see, okay, I had a count sheet here on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I see the deposits there. Does that match what I have here in the bank statement and in the bank reconciliation? That kind of stuff can still be done on a monthly basis. So again, reviews, in my mind, need to happen at a minimum on a monthly basis. Should they happen sooner than that? Obviously, that would make your internal controls better and prevent and detect and correct mistakes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do that. Okay, I know we're running a little bit behind time, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip through all the stuff that I had previously discussed. I'm gonna move here to IT stuff because I feel like that's important. Okay, so in general, the ARC problem is still applicable to IT functions. So that's one thing I want everyone to keep in mind. Each person should have an individual password to get into the system. Obviously, I've mentioned Detrix and EagleSoft. I know both of these have the ability to require people to put a password in order to get into the system. That needs to happen. More importantly, never have passwords shared, ever. If you hear it happen once, then you need to bring it to someone's attention. And that password needs to be reset and have a conversation instructing them not to do it again. And even maybe have them sign a document stating that they won't ever do it again. Because again, if they are sharing their password, there is a reason why. So if you hear it happen once, I definitely recommend that you have a documented conversation with them, basically saying, this can't happen again. At least it's susceptible to fraud. Again, you're not accusing them of fraud, but you're saying it's not a good internal control. We need to keep internal controls high here, and we want to avoid that. So examples of IT activity for recording. Again, the ARC that I keep repeating over and over and over again. So this would be recording cash receipts obtained from patients, recording checks issued or invoices collected from services or goods purchased, preparing bank reconciliations, recording appointments for the clients. Again, all of this is part of the recording process. Authorization, approving the purchase of goods and services, reviewing the bank reconciliations, the ability to run audit reports within the system to verify accuracy and completeness, the ability to approve journal entries made by the recorder. These are specific authorization tests. Custody, the ability to change IT credentials or privileges, the ability to delete or refund transactions in the system, the ability to print or export information from the system, and the ability to delete or cancel appointments. Notice that these custody type of tasks are different than the recording person. I've had it happen. Obviously, we go into the office, and the person who has the ability to record appointments also has the ability to delete and cancel appointments. And unfortunately, again, that could be susceptible to fraud because they could delete the recording of the appointment and delete the recording of the entry, and then go into the safe and swipe a 10 or swipe a 20. So again, there's certain things, especially if the safe's left open, by the way. So there's definitely certain things that I definitely think should be separate from the recorder and left with the person in custody. And here obviously is a bad example of IT controls. The same person has the ability to record cash receipts and pay for patients, the ability to delete or cancel appointments, the ability to delete or refund transactions in the system, and has the ability to run audit reports within the system to verify accuracy and completeness. So they can completely wipe out a transaction and no one would know. Software reports. These are specific reports that we recommend. Again, we do know that they are within Eaglesoft and in Dentrix. And so definitely these are the reports that we highly, highly recommend. This receipts day sheet by entry date, I think that's a very good sheet to use. It was recommended to me by one of the persons that I reached out to for advice on Dentrix. It was a very nice lady. And she specifically said that receipts day sheet by entry date, when she does the comparison of the two, you see the date that the entry was posted and you see the date that it was recorded, meaning that the date that it was collected and the date that marked as receipt date and the date that it was recorded. And sometimes you'll get a lot of very interesting results that way that might be indicative of fraud. So that's definitely something I would recommend. Account adjustments, deletions, aged accounts receivable, all of these are highly, highly recommended to be reviewed in conjunction with the bank reconciliation and bank statement. Other areas of internal controls. Advice for the safe. I know this is weird, but unfortunately, due to the 2 years of me working in fraud and forensics and the 5 years before that in audit, I always have to recommend this for safe. So when you have a safe, number one, use it. Number two, it is recommended that you have a combination safe and not a key safe. It's very difficult for someone to extract a combination for the safe. It's a lot easier to swipe a key, take it at lunch, get it copied, and then have it returned and no one notice. So I definitely recommend having a combination safe over a key safe, if it's possible. Have a limited number of individuals that know the combination. If the money goes missing, it makes the suspects or individuals to interview smaller and reduces the price of an audit or an examination. Not only that, but then you at least know who the suspects may be if they were the ones that got into the safe. Organize the safe as best you can. There's been some safes I've literally got into, and true story, I went into one of them and they actually had 3 checks that were written to them that they hadn't cashed that were literally 3 years old. And they were sitting there at the bottom. And that's because no one had emptied out the safe, which goes into the last part. Examine and completely empty out the safe once a year. So it's definitely something that we would recommend we do. Most dental offices don't get a lot of cash from patients, so I'm not sure if cash fraud happens that much. Although I understand why you say that, especially with the Dentrix and Eaglesoft softwares, most people aren't taking cash anymore. However, unfortunately, in some areas, it still is happening. And so for the areas that are still taking cash, this would be my advice for the safe. Advice for environment. Someone mentioned it earlier, have a security camera installed near the safe location or in the area where money is being exchanged. This is a prevention and a detection. Have an owner lockbox or a fraud hotline available for staff. This will allow everyone in the practice to feel comfortable sharing tips. Tips is the #1 way that fraud is detected in any business, in any industry. So we always want to try to encourage them to share those types of tips, and having a fraud tip hotline or a lockbox where it's just a hole and anyone could put a slip in there and have it locked and safe. That's definitely something that we would recommend. Offer to have staff take fraud or accounting training. The one thing that is the number one excuse that we get whenever we interview a potential suspect or a potential fraudster is ignorance. They like to say, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't know that was a policy, or I didn't know that I was required to do that. Obviously, if you have recorded trainings of someone going to accounting or fraud seminars or trainings, then it's hard for them to claim ignorance because they went to the training, they should know better. And it's for some reason, it's a lot harder for them to say, you know, well, I wasn't paying attention during that particular training, even though you sent me there, versus, oh, I stole this money. So obviously, we want to try to avoid and eliminate as much excuses as possible. Make it clear that any fraud or theft will not go unpunished. As I stated earlier, around 50% of cases are not reported to law enforcement. I get it. Sometimes the task of doing that, the cost, is more than the actual theft itself. But unfortunately, if it doesn't go submitted to the law enforcement and nothing happens, then there's nothing to stop that person from possibly committing it again at a different dental practice or happening again at your practice, because, you know, maybe someone finds out that that person got away with it and they'll be like, well, I need an extra 50 this month. Let's take it a shot. Okay. Okay. Advice for spot checks. I recommend spot checks. What that means is that you do specific types of procedures to show people that you are interested in looking in on them. So as President Ronald Reagan says, trust but verify. Doing these types of spot checks will help them understand, okay, I am being watched, but at the same time, it happens to everybody. It's not just me and it's at random. So cross-training and mandatory vacations are great. What that means is that you have someone take over someone else's duties for a week or two while they're on vacation. This is a great thing to do. However, you need to have someone else replace the person that's doing it. So for example, let's say the office manager goes on vacation and you have the office clerk who normally does recording, but now suddenly they've been cross-trained to do the authorization. That's perfectly fine, but now that office clerk should not be doing anything recording related while that office manager is gone. So again, you got to keep in mind the ARC at all times to make sure that this is prevented and detected. Use your instincts. If you feel something is wrong or you notice a pattern, look into it more, investigate more. These are the kind of things that cause tips to arise, and more importantly, issues to be addressed before it comes out to be $485,000 like the one that I mentioned earlier. If something is suspected, request support documentation to look through it. If challenged, meaning sometimes I have people say, well, you know, they'll ask me, why am I asking for the support documentation? And I don't want to let them know that I'm onto them. I get it. All you have to say is, I don't understand something, so I just want to look into it. You're not saying, I think you committed fraud. What you're saying is, I don't understand it. I'm looking into it. And no one could say to you, of course you understand it. Why are you asking about it? I mean, number one, if they were to do that, it would show a sign of defensiveness, and then you really know that something's up. But number two, typically most individuals won't do that. So again, if you wanted to request the support documentation and you got challenged, definitely say, I'm just trying to look into this. I don't understand it. Save the information you have that makes you feel suspicious, because more than likely, if for some reason that person gets the feeling they're going to be caught, that's the kind of information they're going to delete or get rid of. So make a copy or save a copy if it's digital, or save a print screen or something like that in order to keep it locked in with you, just in case later on down the line they go back and take care of it. Call your auditor or forensic accountants and notify them of your concerns. If they do not notify or discuss the issues with you in person, this may lead to them to try to delete it. So what that means is that you want to try to understand the issue, and you may want to give them the opportunity to explain themselves. I get it. However, if it's making you feel suspicious, there's a problem. Obviously, there may be, I think that most people, when they think someone makes a mistake, they kind of already know it. Like when I review work from my auditors, from my staff, I look at it and I go, you know what, this doesn't balance, but I think all they did was accidentally type this extra zero. And so I'll remove the zero and it works out and everything reconciles. Okay, that's a mistake. Versus if you have a suspicion that someone's stealing money, might be a little harder for them to explain away your suspicions. So again, don't discuss the issues with that person directly. Get the information you need and talk to the people that would know better, such as the auditor or the forensic accountant that you use. Small practice versus big practice. So here's just a couple of things that I've highlighted. Some helpful internal control tips. Small practice, easier to detect whether it's a tip or provided or not. Easier to implement change if something isn't working or mistakes are being made. Less time required to review the records or spot check, and accounting software is vital, but can be managed in-house. Large practice, large number of employees, so the ARC problem is less often to occur. Problems are not needed to be, filled based on this. Positions are not needed to be filled based on necessity. Therefore, they usually have better people that have experience and actually have had, the fraud training or accounting necessary to address issues. Owners can be a little less involved, and more individuals can be on the lookout for fraud or theft. Small business versus large business negatives. Not a lot of personnel, so the ARC problem is always an issue. Sometimes positions are filled based on necessity and not experience. Owners required to be more involved. Fraud of any kind can have a harsher impact because it's a smaller business. More controls are needed to cover the accounting for multiple offices for a large practice. Again, these are all listed here, and I hate repeating myself or reading over it. But as you can see, the main difference is that it's people. Larger practice, larger amount of people. Small practice, smaller amount of people. There's good and bad that comes with both of that. And our goal, obviously, is to always be on the lookout for the ARC. Owners, what you need to know. So I wanted to give you the cliff notes of everything because we've gone through an hour and I know I'm trying to wrap up here. So it's 8:05, so I'm a little over. Hopefully I can wrap it up here in the next 5 or 10 minutes and take questions if necessary. So owners cliff notes, have bank statements sent to you directly, then provided the managing officer to recognize the accounts. If you have the office manager reviewing the bank reconciliations each month, have them send a copy to you digitally along with the deposit summaries of each deposit. No one should have the rights to reset passwords, assign rights to perform tasks, or set up accounts but yourself or a third-party provider. If a third-party provider is used, they should only make changes after your approval. Have written established procedures for how you want the practice to be ran. It is never a bad idea to spot check anyone at any time. These are just some recommendations I have based on my experience and looking at dental practices as a whole. Office managers. If I have office managers on the presentation here today, I may have also mentioned you a couple of times in regards to tasks and procedures. Here's some things for you to be known. Number one, I believe office managers are valued and trusted. Check-ins or review as a business and it's not personal. So please, if you get a check-in from your owner or you get a review, it's not personal. It's part of business. The more reviewers used for information, the less chances of there being a mistake. If there's less mistakes, there's less chances, number one, of a cleanup, but also there's less chances of you being accused of fraud. So office managers, have other people review your work. It saves you in the long run. Avoid the ARC problem. Again, it guarantees, less work for you. Obviously, if you can't do the recording and the authorization, then all the recording tasks are not up to you. So give it to the person that it is up to. And implementing internal controls generates efficiency in the procedures, which obviously is everything we want in a dental office. It's fast moving, it's fast paced, patients are coming in and out. We want to keep things moving and keep things in a good efficiency manner. Okay, I'm going to quickly just buzz through these real quickly. Obviously, I am part of the fraud and forensic services. And so these are some of the services we provide to dental practices. The first one is background checks. Bailey runs a background check on potential hires. Definitely that's been helpful for some dental practices. We do offer a fraud hotline. Statistics show that fraud is discovered 6 months faster when an organization has a fraud hotline, so something to consider. And then, of course, we have our business outsourcing services. Bailey's dental accounting experts, such as good old Art here, are definitely helpful for us if we have any questions or concerns. We have our forensic examination process. The short summary is that if you think you have a fraud, you contact us. You can do it via our website or contact me directly when I provide you with my contact information. And we have an introductory phone meeting where we discuss your problem. After the engagement letter is signed, we request specific key documents. We do unrecorded interviews to gain knowledge of the processes and the procedures. We see where weaknesses may occur. We collect the documentation, and then we verify if there's any findings or if if there's potential fraud. We typically do this within a 1 to 2 month time frame. And the good news is we're constant in communication with whoever we've been designated. I specifically said owner in this slide, but I know some owners just want to be seeing the results, but want the office manager to be fully, the person in charge. And that's something obviously we provide there. If I need to contact the office manager all the time, I can. Then we have the ICE audit, which is, again, the ICE audit is called a forensic audit, which means we don't have a suspicion of fraud, but you just want us to check in on your internal controls. Is there any weaknesses? Am I susceptible to fraud? If so, this is the type of investigation that we would do. And we would come back and say, okay, here's what your internal controls are. Here are where the weaknesses are. And here's how we recommend that you approve them. Of course, if we start the ICE process and for some reason we notice that fraud is occurring, then naturally we will bring it up to the owner and they can decide what they wish to go from there. Okay.
Brandon, great, fantastic presentation. I got one more question that came up while you were wrapping up here. What is the initial action you have to take when you detect the inchoate fraud? Not worry about possible wrongful accusations by a criminal who might accuse the dentist, such as wrongful termination of employment, sexual harassment, etc. So in other words, the doctor's question is, what happens if, you know, the initial action and the crook turns it around on you and says, no, I didn't do anything wrong. You're the bad person. What do you do?
Well, again, that's why I told you in the one slide, if you detect fraud, you need to talk with the auditor or forensic accountant before you proceed. As a forensic accountant, every examination that we do, we plan on somehow, some way it going to court. And the person fighting us, obviously, in trying to defend themselves and saying, oh, it was wrongful termination, or it was harassment, or all these other types of countersuits that they could provide. But guess what? If we're trained that everything we do is going to go to court, and that our particular reports will stand up in court to show, no, this is legitimate proof that this person was committing fraud. The hardest part about showing fraud is intent. So the hardest part is for us is to be able to show in court, this person intentionally did wrong and cheated this practice by stealing X amount. Again, that particular person who stole $485,000, we had to show intent. We had to show that they knew what they were doing was wrong. And so we're trained to do that. And in order for us to do that, we need to be obviously talked to. And again, if you don't, sometimes I get calls where they're like, you know what? I think I have a fraud, but I don't want to pay for it yet because I'm a small practice. Do you have any recommendations for me before I hire you guys, just to check and save some time and save some money? And over the phone, I provided some of those recommendations. And at the end of the day, some of them came back and said, you know what, it wasn't fraud. Thank you very much for your information. And I've had other people come back and tell me, no, it was fraud. We need your help. So again, it's just something that I would recommend in order to avoid those type of lawsuits is get forensic accountants involved so that they can gather the evidence and make you feel more comfortable with where you at before you decide whether to terminate that employee.
That's a great answer. And folks, the bottom line is, like Brandon says, you have to verify, inspect what you expect. I mean, if the people working for you know that you're honest and that you're watching them and you're watching the store, they're less likely, doesn't mean it won't happen, but they're less likely to come after you and get money. And just use your common sense. And if someone isn't acting right, background checks are really, really important. I've run into, Brandon, situations where I'd get a call from somebody who says, oh, there's this one dental employee who's running around going from office to office in Orange County, and they're stealing money. And there are people that do that. So you've got to do all these things. Listen, Brandon, that was a fantastic presentation. Brandon's information is down at the bottom of the screen, as is mine and Anders. If you are looking for a new CPA relationship, we take care of dentists. We do lots of stuff. If you're looking for the employee retention tax credit, we can help you with that too. Don't forget to join us on May 12th for our next Business of Dentistry with Curtis Marshall of Dental Intel and Dr. Jeanette Kern. They'll both, the three of us are going to be showing you how to find profit holes through your dental practice software. Brandon, great job. Thank you so much for your great information and insight. This is so important for our doctors. They work so hard. We don't want them to lose money to people who don't deserve it.
I'm grateful. Thank you very much for having me. And I apologize for my little technology glitches. Unfortunately, it's what happens when we're doing this electronically. But definitely, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email. I'm here to help. I'm here to provide advice. So that way, then we all could feel safer at night. I enjoy letting people sleep well at night. That's always my goal in the job that I do.
Well, you do a great job of it, Brandon. And thank you again so much. And folks, again, remember, we got a webinar on the 21st and one on the 27th. They'll all be at 6 to 8 p.m. And also, All of our webinars live on the Eide Bailey YouTube page. Just Google Eide Bailey YouTube Dental Practice Series. It's right there at the top. Everybody, thank you for the honor and privilege of your time. I hope the information was valuable to you. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Amanda, thank you so much as always. You're wonderful. And folks, God bless every one of you and have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you the next time we visit, which will be May 12th for this series and a couple more this month. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you. Good night.